Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in again today. What if I told you that the biggest controversy of Shohei Ohtani's career wasn't created by Ohtani himself? What if the real chaos began after he won MVP, after the votes were counted, after the world celebrated? Because tonight, we're not talking about numbers, we're not talking about home runs, ERA, or WAR. We're talking about the moment MLB split in two. The moment one player's anger ignited a national firestorm. And the moment a simple 5-second comment from Aaron Judge became the #1 trending topic in America. From shocking insults, to furious fans storming MLB headquarters, to emergency sanctions that nearly tore the league apart. This story is bigger than baseball, bigger than rivalry, and bigger than any MVP debate in recent history, so buckle up. Because what happened after Ohtani's MVP announcement is the kind of chaos MLB hoped the world would never see. Welcome back to the channel. And now, let's dive into the full truth behind the MVP explosion that shook Major League Baseball. MLB's outrageous outburst of insults against Shohei Ohtani's MVP award was unleashed. Judge's 5-second comment became the #1 trending topic in the U.S., and the announcement of MLB sanctions nearly destroyed the entire league. The moment the MVP was announced, everything was decided. Shohei Ohtani dominated the votes cast by 30 BBWA reporters, earning an extraordinary total of 420 points. In his second year with the Dodgers, he resurrected as a two-way player, hitting 55 home runs with a 1.014 OPS and pitching an unprecedented 2.87 ERA. American sports broadcasts declared that there was no longer any choice, and on social media, voices even called the lack of surprise itself a threat. It was a blow that once again proved his place as MLB's greatest player, and a scene that symbolized the dawn of his era in baseball. However, even more brutal than the numbers was the difference in votes between his rivals. Schwarber scored 260 points, and Soto scored 231. Though they were in second and third place, the 189-point difference between them and Ohtani, towering above them, felt more like a declaration of overwhelming skill than a simple defeat. The MLB commentator said that Soto was a great player, but he couldn't reach Ohtani's level, and Bay fans calmly accepted that this difference wasn't luck, but reality. The numbers don't lie. This fact was thrust upon not only the players, but the entire audience. But what was most dramatic at the moment wasn't the result itself, but the expression on Soto's face. While Los Angeles and all of Japan were in a celebratory mood, a single shot was quietly shown in another room. Soto, still in his Mets uniform, was there. The moment his name was read out as third place, his face showed shock, confusion, and a sense of denial. But he still held his sword tightly in his hand. His expression was not that of a player accepting defeat, but rather that of a man who absolutely refused to accept the result. And it was this slight change in his expression that signaled the storm that was to come. Immediately after the MVP announcement, while the entire nation was in a festive mood, one man broke the mood. The New York Mets player, appearing remotely for an unexpected interview, slumped his shoulders, then instantly assumed a grim expression and began to speak as if he was letting out the emotions he had been suppressing. His voice wasn't rough, but he clearly couldn't contain his frustration, and deep in his eyes, he could see the anger at the loss and a wavering pride. Soto began by saying he deserved at least second place. He cited his recent transfer to the Heat and his lack of adjustment as reasons, but he emphasized that he still deserved more recognition. He then turned his attention to Shohei Ohtani, who has the advantage of being a two-way player. This was only his second year with the Dodgers. He expressed his dissatisfaction, saying he was completely accustomed to his new surroundings. What came across the screen wasn't a point of fact, but rather an attempt to justify his own frustration. But the real issue came next. He snorted slightly the moment Schwarber's name was mentioned, declaring that it would be a laughing matter if he were ranked below him. His final words sealed the deal. "Even if I ever come in first, I won't accept such a ridiculous award." At that moment, the expressions of the program staff froze, and a speechless silence fell among the commentators. Few players in recent years have uttered such a blatant insult toward one of the most prestigious awards in sports. Whether the outside world was unaware of this or deliberately provoking, this comment inevitably sent ripples across the nation. The interview footage was quickly clipped on ESPN and Fox Sports' MLB network, instantly dominating social media timelines. Phillies and Dogs fans in particular reacted furiously, demanding, "Who do you think you are? This isn't a tournament to satisfy personal pride." Criticism raged, demanding, "What are you talking about when the numbers show the difference in skill?" Experts shook their heads, asserting that while they understood the frustration, this only diminished their own self-worth. Amid the growing fury and self-justification, reporters quickly began to present the hard numbers. There was no room for debate. First of all, it was clear to everyone that Ohtani's performance was in the realm of abnormality. As a batter, he had a devastating 1. OPS and home runs, and as an investment, he had also avoided 62 strikeouts. He also left behind a top-class 2.87 ERA, revolutionizing MLB once again. Faced with these numbers, reporters debated who could claim to be on par with Ohtani, and their assessment was overwhelmingly shared. The next comparison was with Kyle Schwarber, who was also in the NL home run race. He led the league with 56 home runs and 132 RBIs, and there was a time when even Ohtani surpassed him in terms of slugging power. It was no surprise that he received the majority of the 2 votes, with one reporter saying that Schwarber led the league with his sheer destructive power as a hitter. His presence was undeniably intense, and while the wording may differ, he was a dominator. So what about outside? A season with 43 home runs and 38 base hits, a 43-38 record, was certainly impressive. However, in terms of overall performance, including OPS, scoring contribution, and impact on the team, he fell far short of Ohtani and Schwarber. In fact, official data showed a clear difference in FO, 9.4 for Ohtani, 5.8 for Schwarber, and 4.9 for Schwarber. This was the cold, hard reality borne out by the MVP voting results. The numbers were ranked without emotion or pride. They simply reflected skill. MLB Network analysts also unanimously pointed out in their segment after Soto's comments went viral, Oto's third-place ranking is a logical conclusion. Comparisons with Ohtani are not valid, and the reasons for his inferior ranking to Schwarber are clear. His comments were not overly emotional. They were based solely on professional analysis. This level-headed opinion further highlighted Soto's comments, demonstrating to the public that his irritation and frustration were merely cries unsupported by facts. The numbers were not visible to the public. Rather, they continued to be mercilessly displayed as evidence that contradicted his words. On the day Aaron Judge won the AL MVP award, he should have been quietly savoring his joy amidst the celebratory atmosphere. However, the question posed in the interview room was not about his accomplishments this season, but about Soto's verbal abuse. The moment the reporter spoke the name, the judge's expression showed a moment of surprise, but then it quickly faded to a calm, unemotional ME, exuding an air of composure as if he had grasped the situation. Then his smile faded, his gaze took on a sharp gleam, and a sense of tension completely shifted the atmosphere. The judge paused for just a second before speaking. The silence was short but profound. Then, like a condensed verse, his words were cold, complete, and undeniably powerful. Jealousy breeds greatness. Let's change the question. That was all. There was no unnecessary explanation or far-fetched expression whatsoever. Just 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, the judge completely cut off the rest of the conversation, demonstrated the essence of sportsmanship, and clearly declared that the topic was not worth pursuing any further. After speaking, he quickly turned his gaze to the moderator and quietly urged the next question. His face showed no sign of anger or irritation, only deep disappointment and a determined determination not to get embroiled in this controversy. The surrounding reporters froze for a moment, and then a strange silence enveloped the studio. Judge's attitude was not one of kindness toward the outsiders. Rather, it sent a strong message: do not harm the situation. This brief exchange quickly spread across social media, and Takuma was given a second glance at the entire nation. Judge's words praised Judge's words as the shortest and sharpest of all, and his 5-second comment made headlines in sports media. The uproar surrounding Judge's remarks seemed like a temporary scare. However, the real storm was unleashed by the unexpected actions that followed. The source of the fury was not Judge himself, but his agent, Yazaki, whom MLB officials were trying to calm. The agent suddenly posted from his personal account, urging Mets fans to speak out against Ohtani and the unfair structure of MLB. This post was also shared by Takuma, fueling fan anger and misunderstanding, exacerbating the situation. As a result, the next day, approximately 300 Mets fans gathered in front of MLB headquarters in Manhattan. They were holding handmade placards reading, "No respect for MVP Cam," and the street was filled with uneasy tension as the doe-eye flew around. What should have been a personal player's complaint was transformed by the agent's post into a full-scale lecture on the organization, sparking a furor with media outlets rushing to the scene. This bizarre scene involved the Mets as a team and escalated into a scandal beyond imagination. However, the heat of the protests did not last long. The situation quickly escalated as police began to intervene due to the obstruction of traffic and excessive noise. After several videos were posted on social media, criticism flooded the internet, calling this no longer a lecture but a foolish outburst. The Mets fan community in particular was deeply shaken, with many lamenting that this was not a New York Mets incident, but rather the mischief of one agent that had tarnished the reputation of the team. His actions, intended to defend others, ended up severely damaging the image of both him and the Mets, which should have been the best possible outcome. This incident completely forced MLB to take a stance. League officials condemned the incident as a serious act that went beyond the actions of an individual player and threatened to shake the entire organization, and discussions began within the league about holding the agent accountable. Some experts said this was not an MVP controversy, but a matter of sporting integrity, and Theron leaned toward completely cutting off the actions of those around him. The confusion caused by a single agent's post threw the Mets into the center of a storm of negativity, deeply damaging the team's credibility and brand. The day after the unrest over the player's departure spread, sending ripples throughout New York City, a series of emergency meetings were held at MLB headquarters. According to testimony from those involved, an unusual sense of tension pervaded the conference room, and the missionary's expression was grim. The problem was not simply the players' complaints or inappropriate comments, but the fact that the proactive actions of the agents had led to the out-of-control collective behavior of fans, undermining trust in the league itself. MLB recognized this as an act that went beyond the bounds of normality and was determined to make the strictest judgment ever to protect the league's dignity and order. After 48 hours of deliberation, the decision was finally made. It was a punishment that could be called an example of consolation in the history of MLB. First, the New York team itself was subject to severe penalties for systematic misconduct. Even though the actions were those of agents who are not directly affiliated with the team, the failure to control their influence was taken seriously, and the team and the decision officially announced that Soto would be held accountable for his governance. This decision deeply affected the relationship between the team and its players, and sports media unanimously reported it as the worst possible decision for the Mets at the worst possible time. However, it was Soto himself who received the most attention. He was fined $600,000 for publicly denigrating the league's integrity and disrespecting the MVP, its most prestigious award, and for being at the center of the resulting controversy. More than the amount itself, the symbolic significance of this penalty was significant. MLB emphasized that personal feelings should not cause league-wide unrest, making clear its stance of no exceptions. Even more shocking was Soto's suspension for the upcoming opening day game, a punishment that many commentators argued was not merely a red flag, but a warning. As soon as news of this sanction broke, the nation erupted in a frenzy. Sports broadcasters assembled emergency panels of experts to discuss the stern lesson in public ignorance. A wave of strong opinions emerged, stating that anyone who defies the mighty organization of MLB will pay the price. Three camps, it's reasonable, it's excessive, and it's only natural, flared up on social media, and the debate continued late into the night. However, one thing remained consistent. MLB's aggressive stance was a response to a crisis with no precedent, and a necessary decision to protect the integrity of the league itself. This incident once again reminded everyone of the powerful influence a player's words can have, and the boundaries of what is acceptable and what should not be crossed in the world of sports. With his punishment now official, Ikuto showed up to the Mets training facility feeling anxious. However, the atmosphere there was clearly different from the clubhouse he had known. As he walked into the press conference room, his expression was stern, his gaze tending to be downcast, and his demeanor was a mixture of hesitation and the pressure of the guns. As reporters' flashes swept across the room, Soto's back was covered in a plaque that suggested the flames of the MVP controversy hadn't yet died down. He sat down, took a deep breath, and remained silent, as if he hadn't yet sorted out what he'd lost and what he needed to regain. Even more symbolic was the attitude of the team's leadership. The manager continued to avoid Soto's name when answering questions, and when asked about his punishment, he simply said he would abide by the league's decision, refusing to use any personal evaluations or terminology. This cautious attitude indicated that Soto was no longer viewed as a special presence within the team, but rather as a dangerous individual who needed to be treated with the utmost care. Even in the clubhouse, several key players avoided approaching Soto, and the usual laughter was shrouded in a tense atmosphere. An invisible rift was already beginning to form within the Mets. The New York media was quick to pick up on this strange atmosphere, and the next morning's editions were peppered with scathing headlines. "The Mets have already lost before they've even played a single game," were symbolic, giving the impression that the team's hopes had been dashed even before spring training camp began. A local columnist wrote that the Mets had lost more than just a game, but unity, pointing out that the recent scandal was not merely a personal issue, but structural damage that cast a shadow over the entire franchise. A cold wind was already blowing over the team, which was supposed to be welcoming spring. Meanwhile, a completely opposite scene unfolded on the other side of the screen. In an interview with MLB Network, Shohei Ohtani, flanked by his wife Mamiko and her husband, and his beloved Copen, smiled quietly and calmly declared that both Ohtani and Schwarber were excellent players. These words were neither a criticism nor a term. They simply symbolized the history and composure of a top athlete. In contrast to Ohtani, who was at the center of a competitive situation, Ohtani was surrounded by stability and trust, a clear portrayal of where both men currently stand. The contrast between the two men has thus become a symbol of this season. One is a man who continues to walk toward the embrace of history. The other is a man who, caught in the shadow of pride, slid downhill. Baseball is often told in numbers, but this story cannot be told in numbers alone. There were unseen forces at work: attitude, maturity, trust, and poverty. The Mets' spring has just begun, but whether they can make this a bright season will depend on what they themselves learn from this event and in which direction they move forward. The storm has passed, but the quiet feeling of relief that remains will likely continue for some time to come. And now, after everything we've witnessed, the insults, the outrage, the sanctions, the collapse of an entire franchise's image, one thing has become unmistakably clear. This wasn't just an MVP controversy. This was a turning point in the history of Major League Baseball. Because for the first time, we saw the true force of modern sports, how one comment can ignite a nation, how one player's frustration can drag an entire team into chaos, and how one superstar, Shohei Ohtani, can stand above it all with a calm that silences the noise. While others argued, while fans protested, while agents fueled the fire, Ohtani simply kept moving forward. Focused, composed, untouchable. That contrast, that difference in character, is why he stands alone. And whether you love him or fear him, whether you cheer for the Dodgers or root against them, you cannot deny the truth. We are living in the Ohtani era, and the world is still struggling to understand what that means. But here's the thing. Tonight's story? This is only one chapter of a much bigger saga. Behind every headline, behind every controversy, behind every whispered rumor in the offseason, something even bigger is already stirring. Front office wars, superstar rivalries, secret negotiations, unpublished scandals. Shocking decisions that could reshape the league again tomorrow. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Because if this season has taught us anything, MLB's quiet moments are only illusions. The real explosions always happen when the lights go out. So if you want the truth, if you want the hidden stories, if you want to see what the cameras didn't show, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and come back for the next chapter. Because we're not done, not even close. And the next story waiting in the shadows might just be even bigger than this one. See you in the next video, where the drama never sleeps. And neither do we.